Many people interested in foreign policy have told me when they come to the Indian Council of World Affairs in Sapru House, they feel a great sense of affinity with this institution because this was where the serious study of international relations in India all began.
The ICWA was set up by a small group of public intellectuals some years before our independence because they felt it important that India have an independent perspective on international affairs. Since then, the ICWA has gone from strength to strength, and it has been a long journey, almost 75 years. One particular milestone in that journey was in 2001, when the Indian Parliament passed an act declaring the ICWA to be an institution of national importance. We thus became a publicly funded independent think tank. Our governing council is headed by the Vice President of India, and the External Affairs Minister is its Vice President. We have 3 focus areas. The first is research, which is carried out by an in-house faculty. Very rigorous research on different parts of the world, encompassing the domain of area studies.
The Council has been very proactive in conducting dialogue and discussion on African affairs and India-Africa relations in order to promote an understanding on African affairs in India, an Indian perspective on Africa, given the priority that now Africa has in Indian foreign policy.
Within the Council, we have a renewed focus on Latin America and the Caribbean region. So we're looking through our studies to find new areas of cooperation such as renewable energy, climate change and the space technology.
Interacting with leading experts, diplomats, media persons and academicians has helped me nurture my research further.
We recently had the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Outlook, which has a lot of convergence with the India's own Indo-Pacific construct.
The learning curve at the Council has been tremendous, and it provides a strong foundation for my future research.
The second is policy. Because we are a think tank, and being close to policy, commenting on policy, and helping formulate policy is an essential part of our functioning.
I think in the new age, what we're seeing much more of is that people want to be involved in foreign policy thinking. They want to have a voice. Now, this is where ICWA comes in.
This is the platform where I, for many years, have come and interacted with the best in the world.
ICWA provides a valued platform for visiting foreign dignitaries to interact with informed Indian audiences. The third is outreach. This is most important because of our role as a public-funded independent think tank, and we carry this out by associating ourselves with as wide an audience in India as is possible. Colleges, universities, other think tanks, and of course with similar institutions elsewhere in the world.
What I would call the democratization of Indian foreign policy. It has moved to distant corners of the country. It is no longer a preserve of Delhi.
ICWA has a robust publications program which includes papers by the in-house faculty, invited papers and commentaries, and books on foreign affairs by not only former diplomats and established academics but also by upcoming scholars. Our journal, India Quarterly, is being published since 1945. ICWA's publications are also being translated into various Indian languages. What is ICWA's role as we move into the future? The vision of the institution is to stay abreast of all the momentous changes taking place in the domain of foreign policy. New areas are emerging. There are strategic technologies, there is climate change, there is artificial intelligence, and there is cyber security. How can our research faculty and the audiences that come here be better informed about developments in these areas? How can we write and formulate research papers to give policy inputs that help in government policy formulation? These are the emerging challenges for ICWA and form a part of our vision for the future.
A very good morning, everyone. I am Pragya Pandey, Research Fellow at the ICWA. It is my pleasure to welcome you all once again on behalf of the Indian Council of World Affairs and Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts, New Delhi, for this two-day conference, for the day 2 of this conference on roads, wind, spices in the Western Indian Ocean, the Memory and Geopolitics of the Maritime Heritage. We are here for the session 5, which is on cultural roots and maritime heritage. A career diplomat of Indian Foreign Service with an experience of more than 30 years. He has been ambassador to Cambodia from 2012 to 2015 and Indian ambassador to the Kingdom of Morocco from 2015 to 2016. He was Deputy High Commissioner of India to London, and he has served in Indian missions in Geneva, Dhaka, Beijing, and Vienna. Prior to joining Indian Council of Cultural Relations, he was Additional Secretary, Indian Ocean Region, Ministry of External Affairs. Currently, Ambassador Patnaik is the DG, Director General of Indian Council of Cultural Relations. Among the speakers, we are glad to have with us once again today Professor Michael Jansen, who is joining us from Muscat, Oman. Professor Jansen is the professor at Aachen University, Muscat, Oman. He is also honorary professor for conservation and heritage management at Geopolitics, Muscat. We are also pleased to have with us today Dr. Jacqueline Armijo. She is an associate professor of humanities at the Asian University for Women in Chittagong, Bangladesh. Dr. Armijo has also taught at Qatar University, Zayed University, UAE, Stanford University, and Cornell University. Currently, she is based in Hawaii, and she is joining us from Hawaii today. Before handing over the floor to the chair, allow me to announce some house rules for the webinar for this session. All the participants are requested to mute themselves when they are not speaking. During the question answer round, the chair and moderator will take the questions. The panelists and speakers can ask questions by unmuting themselves and raise hand option. The registered participants can also ask questions live by typing through Q&A link or by the hand raise option and unmute themselves when their name is announced. These questions will be visible to all the panelists and speakers, and the chair or moderator will pose the question to the panelist or the speaker concerned. With this, may I now hand over the floor to the chair, Ambassador Dinesh Patnaik, to conduct the proceedings for the session. So, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Pragya, and good morning to everybody. For Dr. Jacqueline Armijo, it must be late in the evening in Hawaii, if I'm not wrong, or very early in the morning, depending on where she is. But I'm glad she's joining us from Hawaii, and Professor Jansen, whom I heard yesterday, brilliant professor. I'm looking forward to hearing you once again on these issues. Yesterday, we had a very good session. I mean, I heard most of it from the morning. And the whole idea of having this session on roads, winds, spices in the Western Indian Ocean is an excellent idea. And all the discussions culminated in the evening in the discussion on Project Mosam, which I believe lies at the heart of all that we are doing here. Because that is the one which links all these things that we are discussing together into one project, which if we can manage to implement in a very good way, would be an excellent way to take forward all that we're discussing here today. What we are going to discuss in session 5 is cultural roots and maritime heritage. Now, these are not new concepts, these are old concepts, but are very important to what we are discussing, because cultural roots, for a long time, cultural roots, there was a discussion on what are cultural roots. Is there some criteria, some identification of how do we define cultural roots? Now, cultural roots has gone through a whole lot of iteration. There has been a lot of discussion within UNESCO, within ICCR, which was set up for this. And finally, we have come to a concept which is not really all there, but it is still a concept which works, which is that it is the cultural root is a land, water mixed to other types of root, which is physically determined and characterized by having its own specific and historic dynamics and functionality, showing interactive movements of people as well as multi-dimensional, continuous and reciprocal exchanges of goods, ideas, knowledge and values. Now, this is important because we have to differentiate between what today people are looking at tourism routes, which is tourist routes, and historical routes. Now, these are all part of the same continuum. There's actually, frankly, no difference, except that for a historical route to be classified as a cultural route, it should have had resulted in exchange of people, goods, ideas, knowledge, and values over a period of time. Otherwise, a route can just be a road. It does not matter. Once you classify it as a cultural route, there has to be an exchange of ideas, exchange of people, exchange of technologies, of knowledge and goods. So when we look at it in the context of the Western Indian Ocean, this is exactly what we have been trying to establish, that the Western Indian Ocean was not only the first sphere of international trade in the world, brought on by what we call Mosam or the trade winds, but it resulted in an exchange of goods and ideas which created flow of religion, flow of ideas, flows of technology, and brought forth some of the biggest empires of the world. So in a sense, what we're discussing today, cultural roots, is at the heart of the Western Indian Ocean, and all the winds, spices, and roads that we are talking about in the Western Indian Ocean. Though I've never understood why they put roads in the Western Indian Ocean. You don't have actually roads in the ocean, but that's a different matter. We can discuss that. But it comes to the second part, which is maritime heritage, which we discuss. So the cultural roots and maritime heritage, both are linked. But maritime heritage is something which India is very concerned about, because very few people in India, and also in many parts of the world around the Indian Ocean, really understand how intricately linked we were with the ocean. Because this maritime heritage is something we have lost. If you look at the map of India even today, the map of India shows you a land-based map with Pakistan, China, Nepal all on the top, and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka at the bottom. But if you just turn around the map and look at it upside down, you will realize India is covered by ocean on all sides, on all three sides. Only one side is land. We are a naturally oceanic country. We are not a naturally land-based country. And even today, 90% plus of our trade and other things happen through the ocean. So our maritime heritage is very intricately linked to our international policy. And we have not done enough on that. So today's conference, it has started from yesterday, is part of this thing of rediscovering how we are linked to this whole maritime landscape that is in the world today. And we will be hearing from two of the leading academicians in this, Professor Michael Jansen, who will go first, who will speak about the land of frankincense, which is a great thing about transnational maritime cultural heritage, because at the end of the day, what we're discussing is a transnational occasion. We are not looking at a national thing. We're looking at countries of the world which have exchanged ideas and people and have technologies and religion over a period of years. So we will start with Professor Jansen, then we will go to Dr. Jacqueline Armijo, who is going to speak about the cultural and maritime links between Quanzhou and the Persian Gulf. Here you have to understand, whenever we're looking at trade, most of the trade at that time when we looked at in the past happened with the destination being different, but the traders being different. The Arab traders were the main Arab, Indian, and the Australoceanic people who were the traders. But it linked Europe and China, and it went through this whole area of the Indo-Pacific. So we will hear all this. People who have questions, you can send the questions to me. I can check it out, and we will ask the questions later on. But before we reach that place, Professor Michael Jansen, I'd be delighted to hear you and your views on your presentation on this issue. Over to Professor Michael Jansen.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Let me ahead. Still, there is the point. Okay. Let me ahead welcome everybody again. Sorry. And especially my friends from ASI. You may be knowing that I was 2 years in India from 74 to 77. Especially Professor Vasanchinde, good old friend. Lothal, I was 40, 50 years ago with S.R. Rao. So in a way, I very well understand not only the deep history of India, but also, of course, your wonderful maritime connections. Let me also introduce you from ICCOMOS UNESCO point of view. I am an ICCOMOS expert in two scientific committees. One is Archaeological Heritage Management, ICAM, and the other one is Shared Heritage. There are many more, and Ambassador mentioned correctly, the Cultural Roots Scientific Heritage Committee. What I want to say ahead, you have with ICCOMOS and UNESCO a huge range of expertise, and I, of course, would very much suggest you for the future to go into these already existing expertise committees and the knowledge for your proposal for MAUSAM. Let me also add shortly one aspect, and that is, you have to understand UNESCO has two items. The one is the tangible and the other one is the intangible heritage. We are dealing where you have been applying for with the World Heritage Committee on tangible heritage. Therefore, and honestly speaking, I was missing that up to now a little bit. You are almost always talking about intangible heritage. It's a wonderful idea to have the philosophy and religion of Hinduism connected to oceans and so on and so on. But where are the places where it was executed? And this is the point where UNESCO will ask you for, give us the tangible aspects of MAUSAM. It's not the winds, while the winds are a medium. How can they be demonstrated, precisely described, and their results put on a list? Therefore, my paper will be dealing with direct physical results. That is why I will discuss in short the concept of port and transport, because let's look at the Indian Ocean. It's a big something of nothing. It's water. So what we are talking about are the fringes, because along the fringes, like the frogs in the pond, as we say with the Greek in the 3rd century AD, BC, we are dealing with physical results of different cultural phenomena. This will be important for my paper, and I will show you some results which have been materialized by the government of Oman. In front of you, you see a sewn boat, which was done by Eric Staples, a young ship engineer, and Oman has been dealing with these aspects. You saw yesterday the boat, the Jewel of Oman in Singapore. These boats have been an important part of research, and there is a new lexicon on the maritime Indian Ocean conceptions published by Olms in Germany with the Ministry of Okaf here in Oman. And this is actually the boat, a replica of what you saw yesterday in this miniature with the Prophet Muhammad, I think, inside. And this is a reconstruction of this boat, which is part of the German University of Technology, which you see in the background. And here, a new university, and I had the honor to be not only the founding rector, but in a way, I was also the creative motor behind. Here we have the Research Center Indian Ocean, which is new. And there I have to express, I'm very happy to meet you all with your intentions. And there are different already networks who are cooperating with the topic Indian Ocean. And Rio has 5 different branches: heritage, science, humanities, anthropology, and also economics. And these are the different fields. And here we see already how wide something like MAUSAM could be in relation to those topics, the materialization in the 3-dimensional physical appearance. Finally, I have to talk about form and function. A harbor has got functions and forms. Archaeological sites have no original function anymore, and also no form. So what we are dealing with is new forms and new functions which we have to identify. And we all have to be aware that nowadays nobody sails anymore. We have ships with motor diesels, and nobody is traveling more. We have aeroplanes where thoughts, goods, people, whatever you want, are transported if Corona permits to go. The next one. Now, let me have a short look at the world map. This is an interactive map of UNESCO, and you see about 1,200 sites distributed all over the world. And Professor Rai comments in her articles, and also other friends, that there is a kind of disbalance between Europe. You see the concentration, especially Italy, Germany, Spain, whatever it is, North America, Africa, and also now the Indian Ocean world. Next one, please. Can I kindly get the next slide? I think I have many, I have to be fast. Now here we are in the West Indian Ocean, and I have marked different World Heritage sites which are of importance for the maritime conception. There are not so many in India, churches of Goa, Christian one, group of monuments. This is Mahabalipuram, I think. Then, of course, what is not yet registered is Bombay with the terminal. So not so many. You have very important sites like Lothal, where we heard yesterday from Professor Schinde, very important site. Dolavira will be, you know, you're experts, it's on the list to be nominated next year. We have it in ICCR in the evaluation process. So these are not many sites. We have in Oman maritime sites, only 2, which I will be talking about, and another one which is Kalhat, which just has been put on the list 2 years ago. Then, of course, we have Zabit, we talked about yesterday that, but many of the sites which also were mentioned yesterday by my colleague are IFLA sites, that means landscape sites, but we have Lamu in East Africa, Stone Town, Zanzibar, Kilwa, and so on. I don't go into the details, but you see these were potential elements of the development of a network. The next, please. Now, here we are in my graph. You have seen it in my presentation. I think it's very important. We came across that idea in studying Mohenjo-Daro. We have most recent results. One is important is it seems that in the 3rd millennium, from the Indus Valley onwards, a big revolution took place, and that is the change from land transport to water transport. In one word, this is a port. It seems that the explosion kind of development of Indus Valley civilization, the same in Mesopotamia, the same in Egypt, was based on this invention to systematically go to the water, because in 3000, 2500 BC, we have no horse and we have no camel, we only have the cow, and the cow makes 3 kilometers an hour if the terrain is passable, which the lower Indus Valley is not. So what I want to say is, we have a beginning of something revolutionary, which lasts up to today, and only 100 years ago, a new invention was coming in change from land to air. So here we are, we have hinterland, we have heard about that, we have the physical appearance of the port itself, and we have the delivery. What you say with roads, these are water routes where you have to know where to send what you have in the boat and how the exchange takes place. And that is, for example, a net. The next one. But this net normally is shown in a linear way. It is not a linear system, it is a spiral system. We start here T0, 2500, first interregional network. It was yesterday mentioned between Indus Valley, Mesopotamia, Bahrain, and Oman. Here we are, I told you yesterday. Then we have the Roman Empire with the Periplus Maris Eritrea. I will comment it shortly. 800, the Abbasids. The Abbasids go to Basra, and with Basra and their enormous demand for luxury, the sea trade is intensified, and that's how the Omanis go with their ships, with the dhows, to China, passing India, and the whole route system is motorized, stimulated by the demand of the Abbasids in Baghdad for luxury from abroad. We have, everybody knows, 1430 Chinese. I do it shortly. 1497 the Portuguese. And we always ask, why have they been so successful and everybody else not? We can't discuss that. But anyhow, this is the beginning of colonialism, and we are still dealing today with post-colonial efforts, which somewhere and many people are still suffering from. The next one. But not only this, we have 3 spirals. We have Europe, And you know, in the Baltic Sea, we have the Hansa cities, networks. We have the connection of sailing everywhere. And this European network joins, after 1497, the West Indian one. And the West Indian one is in contact with the East Indian one. So they have vertical networks of their own, not spirituality, spirit system of Lord Sea, and these are the nodes with their networks who are interchanging. And that is the complexity of maritime connections. The next one. I passed this, you all know that this is the monsoon directions during the year with all the spots which are connected to that. The next one. Also this as a short, we can work days about that. This is the Austronesian maritime tradition with the outriggers, which is also somewhere interfering into the West Indian dhow culture. And you see with the arrows that the Austronesian culture makes it even to go to Zanzibar and to East Africa in sailing. And these two parts are in a way two different macro cultural, economic, technical systems. But these were always trans-crossed, for example, with the Omanis who sail around India and go to China, and so on and so on. The next one. Short look at Periplus Maris Eritreae. This is an analysis of Erwind Zeeland. He did a computer analysis of the texts of the Periplus. Everybody knows what it is. And we see the ancient ports. I want already point towards Horori. You see it in the middle, Moskalimen, but also Indian side, Barigaza, which is Baruch. We have Banbor, nowadays Pakistan. We have Muziris, Patnam. That means this is a network, economic network stimulated by the Romans in the 2nd century AD. The next one. Now we come to my original topic, Samharam al-Balid. You see, this is the interactive map of UNESCO, and you see still all the points which are World Heritage sites, that we have the Himarites, Hadhramaut, and Samharam and al-Balid finally always were influenced from the west to the east. It is a little illusion in Oman that they are part of the central Muscat area. They were much more at least controlled and occupied by Hadhramaut. The goal was economic. It was the frankincense, which you see in the hinterland, where you had this gold. And I remember the Christian 3 wise who come to Jesus to bring gold, myrrh, and frankincense. The next one. Now we come to Al-Balid. It's a bay. You see the mountains protectively closing it. It's very interesting. There is an analysis by a German von Miswan. This is the so-called Sachalit Bay, because this was an area. Bible was occupied by a part of the 12 tribes of the Old Testament. So there is a very ancient tradition, and also roots go back to Job, and the Mormons even today believe that this is their homeland. So we will discuss in short at first Al-Balid, which is the later one, 9th to 17th century, and Samharam, which is a very exciting site and which was in connection with your Muziris. The next one. Here, a short sketch of this Professor von Ziesmann. You see all the Greek who can read it, names. Of course, it is from Ptolemy. We have the old sources of the old maps and the old Greek reports on sailing and giving the reports on the ancient history of these areas. The next one. Here's Al-Balid. You see, it looks wonderful. It's about 1,600 meters long, 400 meters wide. The Indian Ocean is in the south, and in the north, you see a khor. A khor is a sweet water reservoir, and here we have it that through the mountains, subsoil water flows sweet, and you have on the one side the sweet water and the salt water on the other side. This khor at the same time was the harbor. we did this archaeological park, and that is what I want to introduce to you. From 1994 to 2000, the government gave me 5 years and said, do it in 5 years, yes or no? I said yes, and you see here it is today. We have in the north of the hall, the entrance, the museum. We checked, this is no archaeology, a bridge crossing the hall, and this is the archaeological site, which we had the problem to design and to turn it into an archaeological park. And here we are. We have developed the whole thing into a concept of ICCR, and in 2017 in Delhi, at your conference, the ICCR World Conference, the Salala guidance was passed by ICCR, and it gives quite good instructions how to set up archaeological parks. That would be one suggestion for me for your other sites to start with something like that. The next one, please. Here you see the view. What we did is we put on the unexcavated area on geotextile a path, and you see it is winding in a way, but they expect 1,000 passengers or 1,500 by these big ships coming from Singapore. They spit them out, 50 buses come, bring them to the site. They have to be entertained, and after 3 hours, they swallow them again. And they have made 1,000 passengers by 5 real. That means 5,000 real income. So what we try to do is entertainment, teaching. We have excavated this grand mosque. I have conserved it in the form as it is. We have a site museum. And on the one side, it is for the locals. They do jogging in the evening. And on the other side, tourists have fresh air, also good against Corona, I heard just in BBC, and of course, culture, which they can study. The next one. Here you see it again, and that is why I say the old function was harbor. It was a harbor between 900 and 1700 AD. It was most probably a cut-off trade through the Portuguese. So this is a ruin. That means the original function, harbor, does not exist anymore. We also cannot revitalize it. So the conception for a serial nomination is to give it a new function and a new form. The new form is an entertaining park with didactics, and the form is that you have conserved archaeology, which needs special excavation and sustainable conservation so that the people can look at something and do understand what we are talking about. The next one. Here you see some potsherds. The experts know it's Ming, it's Celadon, it's Frit from Iran. That means it was a very mixed conception of material culture expressing the relations the Omanis had in those days. The next. Of course, the Portuguese come 1506. They occupy Muscat. Here we have Kuriat. Very close to Kuriat, we have Kalhat. This was made World Heritage Site 2 years ago. So Oman has now 3 World Heritage Sites as harbors, which could be definitely part of a network, and it needs some, I don't know, with Oman, some networking. We might use this term to develop that. The next one. In addition to our work, we have now 64 books on manuscripts from Lisbon, 32 volumes in facsimiles of manuscripts, each original, and 30 books translated into Arabic and English. So we have an enormous corpus of reporting from, of course, Portuguese side on the intrusion in the seas of Oman into the Indian Ocean. The next one. Just have a short look at Horori, very exciting site. You see the satellite image, the Wadi Dabar. Horori is on a small island. It's a paradise. The harbor area is cut off by a beach from the Indian Ocean, and again, sweet water in the Wadi Darbat in the backside. The next one. Here you see this archaic landscape with the rocks, which obviously have been cut down by the Hor as an entrance to the harbor. We are on top of this ancient site, which was in contact 2nd century BC with Musiris, with Patanam. I think also a very important site indicating by pottery from India and so on, their close relations. And they also have amphora. Now we are with Arika Medu, Dr. Schinde, bravo. This is a very excavated by Wheeler. This is another very potential and very important part for archaeological heritage networks. The next one. And you see the camels come and drink there. You see birds there. And we keep it also as controlled as possible, not to disturb the landscape, with a large buffer zone around, so that the people cannot encroach to look into it. No, the buffer zone by UNESCO goes a kilometer away from these edges of the rocks you see there. The next one. The inscription Hadhramaut. We have Professor Alexandra Avanzini. She is our expert there. She did this excavation. She is a paleographer, and all the information, the name of the site, the kings, and so on are mentioned on this stone, still in situ. The next one. Here, a short look into the archaeology. Conception of excavation in archaeological parks is you have to excavate in a way that you can conserve it. And this is the problem. Not too many deep holes. They have to be closed again. Otherwise, water is running. The walls have to be protected from the tops and so on, repointed. So it needs a special approach to present something to the public. The next one. Let me come to an end. This is the famous map from the Chinese, I think. The Silk Road, the One Belt, One Road conception, I do not comment on that. I just want to mention that, and I'm also working in the land Silk Road. We are in Kazakhstan, in Turkestan, with Hoja Ahmed Yasavi. I have excavated in the Utra Oasis. This has primarily, from UNESCO point of view, nothing to do with the One Road, One Belt. So we have to differentiate between political activities and cultural, scientific conceptions. And UNESCO, of course, only can support cultural, scientific ones, as they have to keep neutral. China is a member, India is a member, Oman is a member, and they always counterbalance the interests of everybody. And therefore, yesterday, Ambassador, I'm very much finding your comment good. Scientific cooperation is a good start. Here we have Hayadal with a boat to try to prove the connection between the Indian subcontinent and Mesopotamia. The next one, and that's the final one. Here we are, a very good analysis by Tim Williams for UNESCO. He made a listing, and now we come to the collection of data, a listing of all land route sites belonging to the Silk Roads. And we all know this name is 19th century von Richthofen. These are fictions. Indeed, we deal with complex communication, transport systems, interchanging, which are very exciting. And that, as we see, the Indian Ocean still has almost no research, and this will be one of the big desires for your Mausam project. The last one. Thank you. We will have next year, hopefully 17th to 21st September, an international conference, and Silk Roads to land and to water, and it would be wonderful if we can do something for you in this respect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Jansen. That was really very nice, and I like the fact that you focused on the issue of intangible heritage being intrinsic to all this. Yeah. Because the tangible heritage, you have shown us the monuments you've shown us Sururam, you've shown us all the other places that you're doing excavations on. But essentially, we have to look at the intangible heritage, which is the movement of ideas, movement of religion, of the different writings and books and other things, knowledge that passed from the shared knowledge that is there between the countries of the region. And most important, what you have brought out in your exposition is that the ports lie at the heart of maritime heritage. Because at the end of the day, when you gave your map that between land and sea, it's the port which connects. And if we have to study maritime heritage in a more in-depth fashion, we have to focus on the ports. Which were the ports which linked all these activities together? Whether the ports from Lothal to Mesopotamia to Lamu to all the other different places, it's the ports we have to do. So we have to make a connection between the ports, because the ports then become the fulcrum and the limb or the hubs for this cultural interaction which has taken place. So a very good exposition. I thank you very much for that. You have also shown us the shipping routes which were used across the world. But here I find that we focus on the shipping routes, but we don't focus on who ran these routes, because what we focus on is that the end point, where was the demand? The demand was the Abbasids. They wanted luxury products. So the demand came from, you got frankincense from here, you got cotton textiles, you had indigo, you had silk, you had other things being provided for the rich people, the luxury products. But who did the trading? Who were the traders? Who were the sailors? Were the sailors the traders themselves? Who were the voyagers? How did people go across? Were the ships only people who carried things but did not carry anything else? No, there were people who traveled across. There were pilgrims, there were people who did the trading. Now, not much study has been done on who are the people who have moved from one place to another. Because, for example, I was reading about the maritime Silk Route, for example, where China was connected to a large extent to Europe through this maritime route. But the sailors were all Arab traders and Indian traders and Australasian traders. There were no Chinese people actually sailing the ships. The only time the Chinese ever sailed the ships were when Cheng He was mandated by his emperor to go across. So these are the studies we need to do to find out exactly how the maritime Silk Route and the maritime heritage of this area. But we will focus right now only on the Western Indian Ocean. And I would now request Dr. Jacqueline Armijo to please give a presentation. She is going to give a presentation on the historical and cultural maritime links between Quanzhou and the Persian Gulf. Incidentally, I have been to the area of Quanzhou in Fujian when I was posted in China. So I would be delighted to hear Dr. Jacqueline Armijo. Dr. Jacqueline Armijo, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. And can you start the PowerPoint, please?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, it has been started.
Okay, excellent. So first, I want to thank the organizers, and I've enjoyed this tremendously. And of course, in the back of my mind, I just keep on wishing I were with you all in Delhi, but I'm here in Hawaii. So let me start. Like their ancestors centuries ago, Chinese and Arab traders are once again traveling back and forth from one end of Asia to the other. But today, silk, porcelain, and spices have been replaced with fossil fuels, manufactured goods, and sovereign wealth fund investments. It is estimated that 60% of all of China's exports travel first across the Indian Ocean to the Gulf port of Dubai before being shipped onwards to Africa and Europe. This connection between China and the Gulf represents the revival and recreation of one of the most important trading routes in history, dating back more than 2 millennia. For centuries, China and the Islamic world represented two of the world's greatest centers of learning, culture, and art. And the trade back and forth created waves of influence, both overland and overseas. These influences included aesthetic sensibilities, artistic techniques, and cultural and religious values. Next. Although scholars have long believed that trade between the port cities of the Gulf and the southeast coast of China had flourished from the early days of Islam, it was not until 1998 that evidence appeared not only documenting this early Tang period, which is the 7th to 10th centuries trade, but also revealing the extent of the trade. Next. The shipwrecked remains of a traditional Gulf dhow were discovered off the Indonesian island of Belitung in the early 1880s. This small ship had made its way to China and was on its way back to the Gulf, fully stocked with goods made in China when it went down. Next. In 2011, a selection of 60,000 surviving artifacts from the dhow went on display at the Art Science Museum in Singapore. As I walked through the display of Chinese ceramics, porcelain, and finely crafted gold and silver works, I couldn't help but be amazed by the beauty of the objects, the range of aesthetic sensibilities they represent, and the extraordinary fact of their very existence. These objects survived over a millennium submerged in the waters of the Java Sea. Next. These pieces were destined for the major entrepôt of the Gulf in the 9th century, Suraf and Basra. The mass-produced ceramic bowls were probably bound for the markets of Baghdad and Shiraz, whereas the exquisitely carved silver and gold pieces may have been intended for the royal courts of the Abbasid Empire, as Michael just mentioned. Next. When the captain of this hand-sewn dhow set off for China, he must have been well aware of the goods available for manufacture there, as many of them appear to have been commissioned with certain regional tastes in mind. Next. The small boat, only 60 feet in length, held over 70,000 objects carefully stored in large earthenware jugs that were then tightly packed in layers of rows along the bottom of the boat. Next. Next. And next. Today, after almost 1,200 years, ships, though of a much larger size, are once again setting off from the port cities of China, stacked with layers of rows of containers, packed with goods custom-made in China for the markets of the Gulf. This revival of the maritime Silk Route is just one of the dimensions of the rapidly expanding economic, strategic, political, and cultural ties between the countries of the Gulf and China. Unlike the UAE, which has chosen to invest in branches of iconic Western museums, the tiny neighboring country of Qatar has chosen to focus on reaffirming its religious identity by creating the stunning IMP Design Museum of Islamic Art and actively promoting its role as a major patron of Arab artists with Mataf, the Arab Museum of Modern Art. Opened in late 2010, Mataf's first two exhibits focused on the work of modern Arab artists. However, for their first solo artist exhibit, they chose Zai Guoqiang, an artist famous in the West for his exhibits at the Venice Biennale and his 2008 retrospective at the Guggenheim, and in China for his orchestration of the pyrotechnics at the opening and closing ceremonies of the Olympics in Beijing. By selecting Tsai, Sheikh Mayasa, the chair of Qatar's museums, sought to create a precedent by establishing an East-East cultural dialogue rather than repeat the perennial East-West dialogues. And in Zai Guoqiang, she found the perfect kindred spirit. His exhibit, Sarab, Arabic for Mirage, ran from December of 2011 through May of 2012 and proved to be very popular with both Qatari locals and foreign residents, as well as visitors from the Gulf region. After spending only a few months in Qatar, Tsai was able to create a wide range of artwork that reflected both traditional Gulf Arab values and customs, as well as Chinese aesthetics, while at the same time reminding viewers of the cultural and trade relations between these two regions that go back to the maritime Silk Routes of 1,000 years ago. Next. Tsai's hometown of Quanzhou was perhaps the largest trading port in the world during the 12th and 13th centuries. It attracted merchants and traders from across Asia who established communities, built mosques, temples, and churches, and prospered for generations. In addition to Arabs and Persians from the Gulf region, there were also Tamil merchants and Nestorian Christians. Next. There are no surviving intact Hindu temples in Quanzhou, but remnants have been incorporated into Buddhist temples, and of the more than 300 surviving pieces, many were recovered after being used to build city walls in the 14th century. This is a famous story involving an elephant and a spider, which those of you familiar with Hinduism will recognize. But the carving shows clear Chinese influences. Next. And next. Again, you have a combination of what are clearly Christian, but also heavily influenced by Chinese aesthetics designs. Next. This is a replica of the Ashab Mosque, which is the only foreign house of worship that survived somewhat intact to the present day. Tsai made several trips to Doha before settling down there for 5 months, first learning about the region, its history and culture, and then creating several huge works of art, Before arriving in Doha, he had also made several trips back to Quanzhou to start work on several of the larger projects. The final works proved to be stunning, for not only were they beautiful, they evoked the essence of the centuries-long relation between China and the Gulf and invited viewers to re-examine their ideas about these two regions' historical connections. The exhibit was officially opened with a series of massive daytime fireworks explosions, collectively titled Black Ceremony. With hundreds of people in attendance, the explosions were carried out into the desert on the edge of the city. The aerial designs were simple, yet dramatic, and of course fleeting, being quickly swept away by the breeze. As Tsai explained, quote, Black Ceremony offers a spiritual burial for those who passed away in foreign lands. This ephemeral explosion in Doha attempts to confront matters of life and death, remembrance of history and ancestry, and the interrelationships between different cultures. Through the time-space tunnel of art, the project strives to call upon the fundamental things in life that move us, unquote. I will focus on three of the many works created for this exhibit. Homecoming, a collection of boulders. Route, an imagined Ming Dynasty map of the Maritime Silk Route. And 99 Horses, a painting of a herd of horses. During the exhibit, even before the visitors entered the museum, they had to first make their way through what appeared to be a random scattering of large boulders. Next. 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 The boulders were also filled the lobby of the museum. Some visitors walked quickly through, whereas others, especially native speakers of Arabic, tended to slow down their pace as they began to notice engravings in Arabic on the boulders. Some of the engravings were in a more traditional calligraphic styles and therefore easy to read, whereas others were in unusual styles never seen before. Next. The inscriptions were epitaphs carefully copied from the gravestones in the Muslim cemetery outside Quanzhou and inscribed on the boulders. As a child growing up in Quanzhou, Tsai often visited this graveyard and remembers noticing the undecipherable squiggles on them. Next. So this is the Muslim cemetery outside of Quanzhou. Next. Decades later, when he was asked to put together the exhibit, he went back to the cemetery with local Chinese Muslim historians to find out more about the gravestones, the lives of the Muslims buried there, and the meaning of the inscriptions. Next. These are scenes from the Maritime Museum in Quanzhou, which I hope everyone has a chance to visit at some point. I was in Quanzhou, but back in 1981, when there was no museum at that point. He found out many of these tombstones were of the earliest Muslim settlers in Quanzhou, mostly traders from the Gulf, and the most common and to die in a foreign land is to die a martyr. For many Qatari and Arab visitors, the last inscription was a powerful reminder of just how far traders from the Gulf had traveled and settled, and what it must have been like to be so far away from friends and family. Tsai named the exhibit Homecoming, and for him, it represented a symbolic return of the souls of the departed to their home, and hopefully some solace and closure to those who died so far away from home. Next. Next. So this is, these are large boulders in Quanzhou that are having the inscriptions inscribed on them. Next. And this is the entrance. This is in front of the Mataf Museum. And you can see some of the inscriptions. Next. 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 And next. 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 The next exhibit is 3 fishing boats, 2 from Quanzhou and 1 from Doha, floating along the waves created in a large water tank and surrounded by fog. This exhibit reminds the visitor of the seafaring traditions of both cities. In the not-so-distant past, life for most Qataris was extremely harsh, with those living along the coast making a living through fishing and pearl diving. Within 2 generations, Qatar has gone from being one of the least developed and poorest countries on earth to the country with the highest per capita GDP in the world. Despite the extraordinary wealth of Qatar today, the memories of the difficult lives of parents and grandparents is readily evoked by the simple fishing boats surrounded by fog. Next. The boat is immediately followed by Route, a huge map laid out across the floor. The map, which is approximately 3 meters by 5 meters, is Tsai's interpretation of a Ming Dynasty woodblock map charting the maritime route from Quanzhou to the Gulf. In his version, the traditional Chinese junks are joined by several Gulf dhow. Although the juxtaposition of junks and dhow may seem anomalous to the contemporary eye, Tsai has managed to render, through gunpowder no less, what Rudyard Kipling has described so well in his poem, The Junk and the Dhow, almost a century ago. In this poem, Kipling honors the dhow and the junk as being the historic ancestors of all leaderships, as well as the source of major seafaring technology. Next. Like the other large-scale gunpowder in the exhibit, this work was created with the assistance of dozens of local volunteers, including myself. One of the many interesting characteristics of Tsai's work is his practice of including dozens and often hundreds of local volunteers to help create his pieces. His willingness to work closely with so many untrained assistants as he carried out these highly complex and volatile productions reflect many things, including his commitment to incorporating local communities into his artwork. The process itself starts off very straightforward and then culminated very dramatically. First, the volunteers tape together a large, thin piece of cardboard that Tsai first traces the outline of his work and then paints in large strokes. The volunteers then carve out the strokes, thereby creating a huge stencil, which is then carefully lifted up and placed on top of specially made Japanese rice paper. Next. Tsai then spreads various types of gunpowder across all the exposed areas of the stencil. An even larger piece of cardboard is then laid on top of the stencil, and the gunpowder. Next. A fuse is cut and placed next to the gunpowder at one end of the painting and then lit. Next. The explosion is loud and the image created by the stencil is seared into the rice paper. Next. Next. And next. All of these gunpowder creations were made in a large warehouse-like temporary exhibit space located in the parking lot of the Museum of Islamic Art. The entire production was made open to the public, so that in addition to the hundreds of local volunteers, there was also a steady stream of hundreds of student groups and visitors who came to watch the dramatic proceedings. Next. This is another example of one of the things he made for the exhibit. The Arabic writes out the word fragile in the local Qatari dialect, which is hush. Next. At first glance, you assume that the tiles are all the same, but if you look very closely, they are all individually made back in Quanzhou and then shipped, and every single tile is different. Next. Next. The third exhibit I would like to focus on is another gunpowder painting. This one is the largest of all works, approximately 5 meters by 10 meters, and depicts a herd of 99 horses galloping across the desert towards a setting sun. Tsai chose 99 because of its significance in both Arabic and Chinese. Next. In Arabic, it immediately brings to mind the number of the names of God, and in Chinese, it represents the word for infinity. The final work is stunningly sublime, and its overall effect is further enhanced by a small herd of gold-plated horses suspended high up in front of the painting, and whose shadows add yet another dimension to the work. Next. Once again, Tsai's choice of themes for his work struck a deep chord with his audience. In traditional Bedouin culture, horses are highly prized, and in contemporary Gulf society, the raising and breeding of purebred Arabian horses has become an almost national obsession. But mostly, horses are considered creatures of great beauty, and Tsai's depiction of them is striking. He spent several days both following herds of horses in the desert, as well as visiting the royal stables and witnessing the extraordinary care and training they are given. Tsai's recognition of the importance of Muslim traders in the history of China in general, and his hometown in particular, is unusual, as are the ways in which this history has influenced him. According to Tsai, quote, "My worldview has very much been shaped by the multicultural environment of Quanzhou, so I am well adapted to the various cultures I find when I work around the world as an artist," unquote. For a Han Chinese to be so interested in and influenced by the history of what are generally viewed as barbarians in Chinese historiography is striking, and yet one more example of Tsai's ability to see influences, essences, and connections. It is hard to imagine any other artist being able to re-envision and recreate the historical ties between these two edges of Asia. Next and last slide. In conclusion, I would hope that across the region, museums would look to artists to help reimagine and recreate historical cultural ties, to remind viewers of past connections and future possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Armijo. That was very nice and very fascinating to see the linkages between Quanzhou and the Persian Gulf. Excellent. I have just a few things which I was thinking about, because at the end of the day, the linkages are there for all of us to see. But like I asked Professor Jansen, who were the traders, who were the sailors, who were the voyagers who went? And if Quanzhou had such a vibrant interaction, a maritime interaction with the Persian Gulf, did Muslim communities or Persian communities or communities from that place actually crop up around Quanzhou? And where are they now? Are there traces of communities from all places which came to do business and to do trade with Quanzhou still existing? These are things we need to work on. We can discuss that later on. Now we go into question and answers. I haven't got any questions from people, general questions. But if there's anybody who would like to ask a question, you are please free. You can contact the administrator. Please ask some questions if there's anybody else who can put their hand.
Yeah, there's a hand I can see from Dr. Veronica Walker. Dr. Veronica, you can ask a question.
I also saw Professor Himanshu Pravare also after that. So, Dr. Walker.
Hi, hello. I thank you for, yeah. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay,
yes.
Sorry. Okay, good. I was, for these presentations and also for yesterday, it has been a very interesting symposium so far. I was part with Himanshu a couple of years ago of a UNESCO meeting at UCL organized by Tim Williams, and over there the UNESCO representative was partly opposed to list shipwrecks as part of the Maritime Silk Road World Heritage listing, and it has been discussed here. The ports and how relevant they are, but actually I think that shipwrecks are also part of this core of maritime trade networks. And so if we ignore shipwrecks or we don't add them to the World Heritage listing, then we're maybe missing that big important question that Shri Dinesh was raising: who were the traders? And I think that what we should focus now is that maritime trade networks are not a single factor element or phenomena, and the phenomena of this maritime trade networks includes shipwrecks, ships, ports, and also the environment. So we need to take all this into account if we want to better understand how these elements were combined and developed into a maritime trade network. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. I think that's very, very relevant, what you said. And shipwrecks, like yesterday, Professor Himanshu Prabhare also raised this issue about including shipwrecks in our thing. So, Professor Ray, you wanted to ask a question?
Yes, I want to take this forward from what Veronica has said. And I think that, part of the problem that I see with UNESCO's, the way they categorize nominations, and this is something which I've written about, and Professor Jansen already knows about it. And this was something also which Shri Patnaik raised, tangible and intangible. This is a Western notion of dividing culture. What is tangible? It cannot be delinked from intangible. And if you're looking at, say, let me take just the example of frankincense. Frankincense, yes, luxury item, but it's also, you talked about Christianity. You talked about it as a ritual. You talked about gifts for Jesus that were brought. So can frankincense be sort of categorized as luxury? It cannot be. It was a ritual object. It was an object given to gifts. Similarly, taking Veronica's question forward, shipwrecks, but also temples. You yourself showed, China, Jackie showed, what do we see? Not harbors and ports. We see temples, we see mosques on the coast. Where does all of this come in? It doesn't come in because UNESCO categorizes economic activity, religious activity. They don't like religious activity. So I think that, and this is something which was raised by Asian countries. I think it was Kyoto and Japan, where the tangible, intangible was argued against, that we cannot differentiate. We cannot do, okay, we only see tangible, we don't see intangible. It is all linked, particularly if you're looking at maritime connections. It cannot be de-linked into, all these different classifications. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ray. That was very interesting, because that is actually lies at the heart of when we look at cultural roots and maritime heritage, is to look at everything in a holistic fashion. You look at not only, like he said, shipwrecks, ports, the environment, but also at the intangible heritage, which were the cultural connections which happened. For example, the Ramayana, which traveled from India to large parts of the world, or Sufism, which went from this part of the world, or the temples of Borobudur, or of Angkor Wat, of the Vietnamese temples. All of these took across continents and across the seas, an intangible heritage which also needs to be part of this whole concept of cultural roots. I completely agree with you. We will discuss it further. Pragya, are there any more questions?
Yes, sir. There is one from Dr. Sanjeev Kumar. Please ask your question. Dr. Sanjeev Kumar.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. First, I would like to thank both the speakers for their excellent presentation. My question is addressed to Dr. Jacqueline. She referred to the Hindu community in Quanzhou. My question, and also said that there is no surviving temples. So my first question is, in her idea, how many temples were built? And related to this, as we know, when President Xi Jinping visited Chennai for second informal summit, he and Prime Minister Modi, they highlighted the importance of Fujian province of China and Tamil Nadu state of India. They also explored the possibility of establishing an institute to study the maritime linkages with these two provinces in particular. So my question is second question is based on what Chair said in the evening, that we should highlight the story of people in our research on maritime discourse. So my question is, how do you see the role of people in terms of in their role as a sailor or merchants between the 1,000-year-old history of Quanzhou and South India? Thank you.
Professor Walker, would you like to say something on this? Dr. Walker. No, sorry. Dr. Jacqueline Armijo. Sorry, not Dr. Walker. Dr. Jacqueline Armijo. Sorry.
Okay, there was a lot in your question. It's hard to know where to begin. I don't know how many temples there were at most. Unfortunately, so many of these older houses of worship were destroyed, and then the stones were literally used to build new city walls. So much later, hundreds of years later, archaeologists started to take apart the walls and discovered how many important remnants were there. And most of these have ended up in the Maritime Museum, which is, again, another reason for people to try and visit this extraordinary museum in Quanzhou. And interestingly, the place I've spent the most time in China is Kunming in southwest China in Yunnan province. And there, in fact, Yunnan University has set up a whole department on Indian studies. I think they actually call it yoga studies. So that is more connected with the overland route, the trade route, not so much the sea route. But it would be interesting to talk to scholars who have worked on projects based out of that institute in Southwest China. And as for to what extent there are still remaining communities, of course, there's communities of Muslims all across China. The community of Muslims, specifically in Quanzhou, did not actually survive as sort of fully practicing Muslims, unlike most of the Muslim communities in the rest of China. But I thought was interesting is there was an anthropologist named Drew Gladney who discovered, about 20 or 30 years ago, when I went to Quanzhou in 1981 and couldn't find no Chinese Muslims, but he went a few years later and found a few who said they were Muslim. No, they said they were Hui, which is an ethnic group. And then he noticed that they ate pork and they drank alcohol. And he's like, well, in what way are you Hui? He says, oh, no, our ancestors were Hui. So every year for the Chinese, when you have to give the offerings to your ancestors, they knew not to give their ancestors pork or alcohol. So it's a very interesting example of sort of like what goes last in terms of these religious minority communities surviving from distance. But personally, I have not really focused on the Hindu temples in Quanzhou, though there has recently been a PhD dissertation out of Columbia by someone named Risha Lee, who looks specifically at this and the role of the Tamil merchants as being extremely important supporters and patrons of Hindu monuments.
That's nice. Thank you, Professor Armijo. No, the Hui people are actually scattered all over China, and you're right about that, because they're most places, though mostly they're in Chongyuan, but they're scattered all over the place. So there are traces, and we need to study those also, because this whole linkage, without the linkage of the people, doesn't make sense. If it is only monuments and tangible heritage is one thing, but to do a study on what did the people do, what were the kind of people who went across, who were the traders, who were the sailors, who were the voyagers, who were the, how did religion travel? Why did religion travel on trade? Was it because people set up communities? If you did not have communities, religion would not travel. Because it's only when communities are there that you need some priest or something to come and talk to you and to set up churches and mosques and temples and other things. So that's a fascinating area of study. We shall look at that. But thank you very much, Dr. Armijo, for your fascinating presentation on the link between Quanzhou and the Persian Gulf. Are there any more questions, Pragya?
Sir, there is a question from Commodore R.S. Vasan. He's asking a question to Professor Jansen. If you could kindly give historical significance of the port of Dukum in the ancient route and the connections with reference to India-Oman relations.
Professor Jansen, you have to unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm now on again. Is it Dukum, the modern port Commander is talking about?
He's talking about the historical significance of the Dukum port in the ancient routes and connections, which may be useful in the present context of India-Oman relations.
Yeah, but I understood the name was Dukum. That's a modern port.
Dukum is the modern port.
Yes, and the modern port has no historicity. It's a new port which was built on the plain as a strategic port between Southeast Asia and the West. Another port, in the way, this is part of trans-maritime strategic conception, like Gwadar in Pakistan, in the Makran coast, and other ports. So that's another discussion, because they have nothing to do with the historicity of maritime traditional trade routes.
So there is a question coming in from Dr. Yunki Sai. Please ask your question.
Hi, everybody. Actually, I don't have a question, but I'm very happy to offer an answer, to one of the questions that's been asked earlier, which pertains to actually how many Hindu temples are there in Gential. I'll be giving a presentation on the Gential Maritime Museum later, and I've thoroughly enjoyed Dr. Jacqueline Armijo's presentation on Cai Guoqiang. Thank you very much for that. I just want to highlight that based on the description provided by the museum, in the past, there have been 3 to 5 Hindu temples in Quanzhou, but none of them are in existence now. They've all been torn down. And what happens is that, I think the museum professionals at Quanzhou Maritime Museum are in the know of, certain sites where they could possibly find more Hindu-related artifact. The last I spoke to the former director, for example, I understand that there is a lake that which the local archaeologists believe that there is still kind of Hindu fleets being in the region, but unfortunately, because of real estate development, many of these sites are just being bulldozed and taken over for building new condominiums and all that without proper archaeological digs being carried out. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Yunchi-Chai. That was very, very informative. Pragya, do we have any more questions?
Sir, Commodore Audible Johnson wanted to ask a question a few minutes back.
Commodore Johnson.
So I'll just reduce it because in a way, Professor Himanshu Prabhare has addressed the concern on intangible, but I'll just leave with a small comment that the maritime dimension is so vast that it would be a little, we need to be careful if we do very strict divisions like we look for scholastic education dividing into subjects. And it's good to have built heritage and scientific heritage. But I think what probably some of us are focusing on the knowledge aspect. If we don't build that up, we might run into a bit of a danger. In fact, on the knowledge medium, we can build better collaboration than build. So that's it, sir. I mean, it was, in a way, you have endorsed it and Professor Himanshu Prabha raised the concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Commodore Johnson. I think we come to an end of our session. It's a wonderful session, and I thank Professor Jansen and Professor Jansen. You wanted to say something before we finish? Yeah. Please, Professor, you have to unmute yourselves. Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Of course, as I was the one who started with this division of tangible and intangible, please allow me a final work on the comments which have been made on that. We have to understand, and here I'm not sure what your intentions are with Mausam, but I did understand that Professor Manchu was in Doha to present Mausam on the Tangible World Conference for Tangible Registration. Actually, if it is an intangible world heritage, it has to go to the intangible ones. I have to tell you, I'm very unhappy and I fully support all your thoughts. I give you 2 examples. At the moment we are in Turkestan, it is the grave of Hoja Mar Ahmed Yasavi, Timurid. And now we come into details that we have 6 criteria and in the World Heritage nomination, and criterion 6 is an intangible one, which says it is immaterial. It can be put under criterion 6, but 5 are material. So we wanted to have for the mausoleum, because 500,000 of pilgrims coming there, to have that included. We had big fights on the last Baku conference with the World Heritage Center. And they say, no, this is the wrong place. I am the monitor of Aachen Cathedral, which was 1978, one of the first nominations. And I wanted to have the pilgrimage every 7 years. For 800 years, they are coming to Aachen. They say no, strictly differentiate between tangible and intangible. I do not know how we can cross this border because it is absurd. They are bureaucrats. the word heritage center is just filling forms which are defined in the operation guidelines, and it is very difficult to change those operation guidelines. So it's questions of basic formalities, and I fully support Professor Manchu. I have read her article. Question is, how can we get that in a holistic approach? Wonderful, and I fully support it.
Thank you, Professor Jansen.
Excuse me, the chairperson, can I speak? Can I speak? Because
Please.
I could not find any raise hands or whatever. And I think I intervened because it is very important we discuss with a correct understanding what is the heritage route within the World Heritage Convention and within the operational guidelines. Because otherwise, I mean, we may a bit lost, because there are three categories which embodied together both intangible and tangible heritage aspect.
Yes.
The first, because of course this is quite recent, it's only since the middle of 1990s. There are a special category which accept both a heritage site which embed both tangible and intangible value. And first one is a cultural landscape.
Yes.
And then historic towns, because as you can imagine, historic town itself, we can't divide what is the tangible aspect, because the important historic towns, its value cannot be only architectural asset.
Yes.
Historic town itself, there is intangible element, tradition. For example, Aachen Cathedral, it is a wonderful, it's a ceremony, within the cathedral, for example. I know that Prof. Jansen has been fighting to make it acknowledged within the World Heritage OUV. And the third category is the cultural route.
Cultural roots, yes.
Yes, so it is, of course, I think it makes sense, because of course in cultural route, why it makes cultural heritage? Because it reflects the cultural phenomena, and cultural phenomena cannot be only tangible or cannot be only intangible. It is a complex process and dimension. So it is in the operational guidelines, it has a specific criteria for the cultural route. So cultural route, there are, so far, there are not many cultural route nomination. I mentioned yesterday during my session, it's only, Silk routes is ongoing for 20 years now. Why? It's because it's very complex. And then because we have to embrace very complex aspects, both intangible and tangible, and even other cultural aspects. And there are not many. And therefore, it is not very commonly known that the cultural route inscription takes a very different approach from the classic nomination.
Yes.
So, we can have maybe a further discussion. I don't want too much interrupt, but I thought that our discussion should be based on the sound understanding on what is cultural roots.
Yes. Good. Yes. Unihan, thank you very much. That was very important. We needed to have that, because you're right about the thing that there are three aspects which UNESCO does, which actually put both tangible and intangible together.
Yes.
And especially when you're looking at a transnational nomination, if you're looking at anything which is transnational, then you have to take both tangible and intangible, because just a simple tangible or an intangible differentiation would not work. So thank you very much for the clarification. That was necessary. Professor Jansen, I'm sure you agree with it also. And Commodore Johnson, you raised a very important point. Thank you very much. But I think we have to close it down. I've been told by the administrators that we have overshot our time. I think mostly because of the fascinating expose and also the discussions that took place. So I thank all the participants who participated. But to just sum it up in the end, what we have come to a conclusion is that if we have to look at the cultural roots and maritime heritage, we have to focus essentially, like most of the presenters said, is on shipwrecks, on ports, on the environment, on intangible heritage, on the religious heritage, and on the people. And this is what is the essence of what we are discussing today. And I think when Project MOSM goes forward, or whenever we go for transnational nomination of Project MOSM, or we look at the movement in this area, we are looking at things which encompass both tangible and intangible. I'm going to close down the discussion now, and I will hand it over back to the administrator, who will have some housekeeping rules to say for the next one. But thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Professor Jansen. Thank you, Dr. Jackie Armijo. And thank you all the discussions and participants who made this a very enjoyable session. Thank you very much. And over to you, Pragya.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for chairing the session. And thank you to both the speakers for those very interesting presentations. And thank you to the audience as well. We'll now take a break and we'll reconvene for the next session at 2 p.m.